So this is how we have to start to really grasp the knowledge that is going to be coming into the studio and listen keenly. So we have to really take this information in, because it's not very often that we get a man of this caliber coming to visit us, and so we can actually become practitioners rather than thinkers or philosophizers of what is going to transpire here today.
Kwesi?
Yes, sir.
This is your life, and we want to present this on behalf of the Speakers Club. So please give Kwesi a clap.
Something silent for that. And the Speakers Club Award.
Yeah, basically we set up the first
honorable piece on my shelf, my brother.
Yeah, we set up the first the first Speakers Club Award.
I'm holding the mic in my hand and it's a mic, the statue here, right here. That's
so that's from the Speakers Club Awards.
Speakers Club Award.
Yeah, to Ashra for his historic knowledge from the Speakers Club. You know, so the outstanding contribution. Once again, thank you. I'd like to thank the team for taking their time out and coming down. I know you've got a heavy schedule tomorrow, so we really appreciate you for coming here.
Oh, well, I want to thank success. I want to thank this, I call it this Bobby Wright, peace be upon him, who wrote the psychopathic racial personality. He called it a communiversity. So here at the radio station and the Speakers Club, this is a communiversity, the community coming together to educate, to liberate. That's how we have to see this. We can't expect that because we sit in European classrooms, we're being educated. In many cases, we're being trained to do jobs for Europeans. Right, okay. So I want to thank the community and also the Bless radio station. Bless radio station. Yeah. Yes. For this African community today.
Thank you.
I've got two questions. You touched, well, first question, you touched a little bit on dark matter, and I wanted to know what your connection would be, or if there's any knowledge that you know about with that and the atom, because our scientists today, they talk about the atom being almost 90% empty space.
So you've come just at the right time, because I've just been breaking into a sweat right now, so I'm glad you've come to help us on this.
All right, so I'm ready, right in the middle of the war zone.
Huh? Okay. So, as credit first, I want to give thanks for you to the partner through Bless Radio. You know, we've been hearing so much about you. You know, working tirelessly. You know, but it'd be wise just to give a little background about yourself, you know, and a little thing about consciousness and the kind of work you do. Because no one think of granted that everybody know about you, but just a little background about yourself. Yep.
Well, again, it's an honor to be here in the UK and the African community here, and on Bless Radio. And again, my journey started about going on 4 decades now.
Okay.
Back in 1973. In Long Beach State in Southern California. I met Dr. Yosef Ben-Yakinen, that we affectionately know as Dr. Ben.
Okay, so you work with Dr. Ben?
Excuse me?
You work with Dr. Ben,
I worked with Dr. Ben for 14 years.
Okay then.
But at that time when I met him in 1973, I was a student at Long Beach State.
Okay.
And at that time I was fighting the Gestapo LAPD. And Dr. Ben, that's the first time I heard our African spirituality and black divinity connected to our history.
Right.
And I asked Dr. Ben after the lecture, can you prove what you said here today?
Okay.
I stopped him in the middle of the aisle.
How old were you then? How old were you then?
I was 21.
I was you, man.
Yeah, you're right. Very young.
Very young.
He said, well, not only can I prove it, I can take you back to Africa and show you.
Okay.
And he said, above all, we need young people like you to go back and do the field research, and he walked away. So that started my dream to return back to Africa, and I made that journey in 1981 with him, and I have not missed a year in 38 years.
Oh, you became every single year?
Every single. I haven't missed a year in 38 years since that first trip. In 14 years, I started doing apprenticeship under him in 1981.
All right.
I started working with him. He saw my love for the temples, the monuments. So I actually lectured in the field when he lectured at the hotel. So that was my relationship with Dr. Ben. So that started me on my journey. So there, as I refer to as the books in stone, we can verify many of the ideas that we see in Western religions, whether that be Judaism, Christianity, Islam, or many of these ideas were taken from temples that predate the Western world and these religions by thousands of years.
Okay. So, obviously, you're a lecturer, so you lecture all over the world, or all over Africa. Yeah.
Yes,
So, what particular field are you lecturing? What's your subject?
Well, again, you're attracted to people who awaken your spirit. So, of course, as I mentioned, Dr. Ben, he lectured on African history, spirituality, religion, and that was the course that I took. Lecturing on African origin of Christianity, African origin of the Bible, African origin of civilization, the African origin of Western, the African spiritual mystery system, and as well as the ancient Kushites, Ethiopia. Okay, because I also take trips to Ethiopia every year, which Kush, as we know, ancient Ethiopia is the mother of Egypt.
Right.
So this information, I come with visual documentation. That's what I started with. As Dr. Ben told me to go back and do the field research. So I come with the visual documentation to have, as I refer to as a comparative analysis. So brothers and sisters can see it. Right. There it is, it's on the temples. And then we can see ideas were literally taken directly from the ancient African temples.
Okay, it's quite interesting because before you come, we had quite of a warm discussion earlier on talking about the Bible and Christianity and religion, etc. And one of the things we were saying that, I mean, most people are in this, locked in the Bible and Christianity, and it's like when you start presenting certain truth to them and certain reality that the Bible's, being misrepresented, they get kind of upset with you because they're looking this kind of belief and so forth.
That's the belief system.
Yeah, it's all about the belief system, right? But the question is now, right? I want to question the brother was asking earlier on, right? What books do we have in place in terms of the Bible and etc.? I mean, where do we go in terms of get to the root of the facts information? I mean, yeah.
Well, that's one of the lectures I have and that I will be doing in Birmingham is the African origin of the Bible and the Quran. Well, first of all, I think an intelligent question to ask in relationship to the Bible is that where were the first Bibles written at? And what are the first Bibles? It's like anything. You start with a chronology of time. So where are the first Bible? Where is your first Bible at? Your first Bible was written in Alexandria, Egypt. So an intelligent question to ask, why? Why was the Septuagint version of the Bible, which was around 250 BC, why was it written in Egypt? Why was the Torah written in Egypt? There when Alexander, that we have been taught to call the Greek, when he came, nothing great about him, when he came into Egypt and usurped the throne, he got Aristotle, to plunder the temples that I refer to as the books in stone. There they had the papyruses. This is where the name paper gets its name, by the way. So this papyrus was long before paper and Bibles. There they collected all this material, and after Alexander's death, they built the Alexandria Library. Now we know about the Alexandria Library. Everybody knows about the Alexandria Library.
Yeah.
But do we know about the Temple of Haru?
Okay.
Do we know about the Temple of Ipit-Asut? Do we know about the Temple of Heteru? See, these are the temples where they stole these papyruses and housed in the Alexandria Library.
And it's on the library.
Yes, sir. That's in Alexandria, Egypt.
So I'm just going to just stop you there. Jeffter, could you just, what the event that was taking place, can you just give it out, the details for tomorrow?
Yeah. Okay. Jefftus?
Yeah.
Brother Jar, can you want to do that?
Okay. Yeah, well, it's the opportunity to see the great Ashra Kwesi, Ashra Kwesi at the iconic the iconic Mama Art Center tomorrow. Lectures taking place at 366A High Road, Tottenham. That's N17 9HT. And doors will open at 6 p.m. and proceeding will start at 7. So it's a one in a lifetime event. Please do not miss it, you'll regret it.
Right.
Right.
So Ashra Kwesi, I just want to take you back a bit. Who is Ashra Kwesi for the newcomers, especially the youngsters? What got you into studying history at that level?
Well, again, like all of us, we want to know who we are as a people through the ma'afa or the kidnapping of our.
What made you question in the way you did as a child?
Well, I knew things were wrong. I knew in the church. I asked the minister.
What age did you start to question?
At 9 years old, I asked the minister, "Why don't we have any black angels up on the stage?" And he said, "The devil must be in you to ask that question."
Really? Yeah.
Now, keep in mind at that
So
time.
where was you based? What area?
At that time, I was based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, so I grew up in that area.
Yeah.
So again, keep in mind what was going on at that time period. You see, again, it was a black consciousness going on. So again, we're talking about a cultural movement that was taking place
At that time,
at that time, the civil rights movement. Okay, so
Right.
all these things, I'm looking at on television. So it's evoking my consciousness to ask
What
these questions.
what time period was that?
We're talking about in the 60s.
60s. Okay.
Yeah, we're
Right.
talking about in the 60s, so early 60s. So this is what evoked my consciousness.
Right.
To start to ask these critical questions about us as an African people. So again, going back to the church, I guess that was my earliest recollection in terms of asking the minister, why aren't we in the angelical realm? Why aren't we up? I mean, this is the heavenly world that we see all these European angels up here, European image of a God up here, and so because I questioned it, he said the devil must be in me. So, but I'm glad that happened.
So when he said that to you, what did that
Well, it
make
evoked
you do?
I knew something was wrong as a child. I knew something was wrong, and it started to evoke my consciousness to ask, that I want to know what this is all about.
Right.
So, of course, traveling through the course of life's time and everything, and zoom up to 1973, that's when I met Dr. Ben.
Oh, right.
Right, that's
Was it
when
by chance, or how did you meet him?
Well, that was at Long Beach State, as I mentioned a minute ago.
Right.
At Long Beach State, and I met him, and that day he gave a very powerful lecture on our African divinity, spirituality, and history.
Right.
So again, I never heard that information before, so I asked Dr. Ben. When he was done with the lecture, he's walking down the aisle, I stopped him. I said, "Dr. Ben, can you prove what you said here today?" He said, "Young man, I can take you back and show you."
Right.
So that was very powerful, the fact that he said, "I can show you, I can take you back to Africa." He said, "But above all, we need young people like you to go back and do the field research," and he walked away. That was my dream from that day, to return back to Africa.
So I just want to stop you there, because there's a lot of cut and paste historians now. So what does field work mean? What does that
Field
mean?
work means that you're there, you're on location, you're at the spot. You're not, as Dr. Ben referred to, as an armchair scholar. I'm not sitting around. Yes, books are important to read, but we have to go back to these places where many of these ideas were plagiarized. Okay, they were copied from the temples and tombs in these ancient places. After all, everybody else has benefited from going back to Africa to copy these many ideas. Specifically, we're talking about an ancient Kemet that is referred to as Egypt today, by the Greek name.
So just say, what does it do to the mind when you actually see it rather than read it? What happens to your mind when you actually see these things?
It opens up a genetic memory bank.
Oh.
A genetic memory bank.
Genetic. Can you go back? What is a genetic memory
Genetic
bank?
memory bank is everything that our ancestors have done for thousands of years is still genetically in our code.
Right.
But it's through the shutdown and the denial, through the process of slavery, that shut that genetic memory bank down.
Right.
But we don't want to hear that. See, because keep in mind, they whipped our culture out of us, some of us. Okay, during the whole process of the Ma'afa, the slave plantation. All right, so we were not allowed to deal with our culture, our spirituality, or any form of worship that we had to our African deity, or meaning God.
Right.
So again, we had, not only that, we feared, African culture. Keep in mind, we were not even allowed to speak any African language.
Right.
All right, so again, that's what I said, but and the genetic code is still there. But once you open up that ancestral genetic code, that genius within, that's locked in that genetic memory bank, that's what happened to me.
Right.
It was already there. Okay, it took the evoking of a spirit like a Dr. Ben and a Dr. John Henry Clark. Peace be upon these great ancestors, warrior scholars, all right, uncompromising spirit. And again, returning back to Africa and going through the books in stone. I say the books in stone because you're in the book. These are massive monuments and ancient reliefs and ideas. And people, when I'm over there with the group and I do a comparative analysis with pictorial pictures of the Bible, and even Europeans who happen to be walking by, they're shocked. Whoa, look at that. You see, because the other groups are not doing this. You see, because again, the European system
of now refer to it as white supremacy Christianity.
Right.
They have made people believe in these things that they are real when they are plagiarized from the ancient temples of Africa.
Right, let's stop because we've got a team of questions coming. I really like to thank you for that. You sparked me up.
Okay, so we got a chain reaction.
All right, greetings, brother.
Okay.
All right. First of all, I have to say thank you, and thanks to the ancestors for what you have done and your contribution for us moving forward. Reason why, because I was one of the youngsters that when you first came on the scene, I was like memorized. I couldn't understand Dr. Ben because it was a bit too deep. But then you came on not so deep, and you and your wife there, you both came on like fire. Yeah, a lot of people don't remember those times, but I did want to just add every video. So the point is, you started to explain to us. You was taking people back and giving them tours and showing them about the way some of our women dance and where they get the dance from and those cultures that is in Africa. So I'd like to explain a little bit about the women and the culture that you was introducing us to, because we always talk about history, but our women, we come from our women, so it's good that they got some of this information from you.
Well, my mentor Hemp, or that's the Kemetic word for divine wife, she deals a lot with the African women and the culture and dress. In fact, she has a video on the cultural destruction of African fashion, which is very powerful. It really it blew me away when she put that together. But in terms of the African women and the African goddess, okay, she has one, the African goddess, the spiritual foundation of ancient Kemet. So it was the goddess is the foundation of ancient African spirituality. From their empirical observation, what I mean by their empirical observation is what they could see. So if they're looking at the universe, they're looking at a macro womb that's giving birth to the S-U-N sun, like the micro womb giving birth to the S-O-N sun. So this was the spiritual consciousness that our ancestors related to that feminine principle, because they could not conceive of a god without a goddess, or a goddess without a god. That's called the spiritual dialectical laws of opposites, based off of the spiritual principles as they refer to as Ma'at. Again, so when I ask many ministers to this day, in the scriptures, when it says, let us make man in our own image, I've been questioning this us for a long time. Who is this us? You know, that's Mrs. God. Was it a marital dispute?
Well, that's another thing. That's where we're getting to now. So, one like how you're getting there, you actually brought a lot of people on tour, and you brought them into these pyramids, into these pyramids and temples, and you actually broke down. Because I'm going to finish off where Supreme was talking about earlier on. You actually broke down the 10 Commandments and where they came from. The question that Supreme was asking, which I'm going to ask, is where did they get those commandments, the 42 confessions and declarations of my heart, and all these. So where did the Egyptians get them from, so that the Greeks and everybody can come and plagiarize it? Where did we get it from?
Keep in mind, this took thousands of years to then develop this whole spiritual consciousness of Ma'at, based off of that I have not robbed, I have not stolen. So that was the moral foundation and basis of that came up out of their ancestral genetic memory. These Kari-Hebs are priests. And these priests go back thousands of years. So again, they study these moral principles of life itself. And it's the foundation of these moral principles that later became the 10 Commandments. Originally, there were 147 of the laws of Ma'at, broken down to 42. And then, of course, when the Hebrew religion came along, then again, this is where they were able to get these ideas. Now, can we show people this in the temples? Yes. The Valley of the Kings. Right there we can see these laws that are, they're massive, to go into the spiritual realm that we refer to as heaven today. You had to go through these laws. I have not robbed, I have not stolen, I have not killed. That's your moral balance, okay, to go into the spiritual realm. But again, when we look at the tabernacle stones that we're most familiar with, we always get sketches of Moses and the tabernacle stones, but you can see these, what looks like the tabernacle stones, which is the feather of Ma'at. It represented that moral code and that moral judgment. So this becomes the foundation. So keep in mind that the whole spiritual principles of Kemet go back thousands of years before the Western religions. Now, one thing that we have lost, meaning us as an African people, we have lost chronology of time. So, of course, our time period has been circumscribed within a Western time. And within that Western time, we think within their diameter. And everything that, keep in mind, we had to go to their universities. to go and to become a minister. You have to go to a European seminary school. So again, they're not teaching the origins of these things. All right, they're not doing a comparative analysis of religions that predate the Western world. We're only getting it from the time period that they started. So of course, when we start to talk about these things, that's all we know. All right, we start time with Adam and Eve, then we believe that this is the beginning.
You were saying now they gave Adam a perm weave.
Right.
Perm.
Well, Newsweek put out, back in 1988, Newsweek put a magazine out with had a black Adam and Eve on there, and had Adam with a Jerry curl, and Eve had a weave.
Yeah. That was a popular.
And a brother showed me, see, Adam and Eve were black, but see, because they're black, that doesn't mean that's the beginning of the story. Okay. You see, we have to go back. Where's the earliest idea of man and woman created? Okay. Now, again, Kemet had mythologies and these types of things as well. So their creation story, it was a Sar and a Set. But the difference is they were created simultaneously. There was not a rib taken from a Sar to make a Set. There was not a good and evil story that a Set ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and that's the reason for the world's sins. And she ate from that tree, and her cycle was reminded of that. That's a sick misogynist to wrote that.
But according to Kemet then, and what you've learned, what is the tree of good and evil?
Well, they call it the tree of Ma'at. I revealed that on the temple. You have the large tree. You have also the goddess Sheshet.
The listeners want to know.
Yes, the goddess Sheshet. She's giving the fruit of divine knowledge.
Yeah.
The patriarchs who came from the north, they did not have a spiritual principle around the goddess. So again, that was wiped out in the Western religion. The goddess was wiped out, but she was picked up in Catholicism. And where is she picked up in Catholicism? When the Roman Byzantines come on, she's worshipped as the Madonna and Child. That's why you have Mary and Jesus is sitting on the lap. Mary, that's a copy of a Sar, Aset and Haru, with a Set with her holy child, Haru, on her lap. That was literally plagiarized. So the Black Madonna in Notre Dame, but hopefully that picture wasn't burned of the Black Madonna when it burned down. But that, prior to Western Christianity, that was a Set and Haru. When the Romans took the religion out of Kemet, spirituality, and spread it throughout their Western world, Gaul, which is France, and Britannia, that is now Britain, Germany, Germania, which is now Germany, that's why you have this Black Madonna everywhere, because that was a Set who they were worshiping, known as the Herculaneum worship of the goddess Aset. But when Byzantine Romans took over, this is where the slow conversion of Christianity came in. She still remained black, but she was called Mary, which is, by the way, the Kemetic word is called Murray, that means love. So literally, even the name Mary was taken from Murray, that means love. My wife is called Murray Ra.
Oh,
yeah, so it means love by Ra.
So Mary means love?
Yes, it means love by Ra.
Okay.
So again, this is why it's always the Western church, in the Western world, it's always had a fear of African people studying ancient Egypt. Because there we can see where these things were copied and made up. The Western church, even not only African people, but the world. There's always been a fear, because they shut down the temples. Who shut down these temples? Theodosius in the 4th century AD, and also Justinian in the 6th century AD. They shut these temples down because they were copying these ideas. But they carved on the temple. You can see a Set carved on the temple where they try to chisel her out, the Madonna and Child. All right. So anyone coming to see that and say, why is this Madonna and Child identical to Western Catholicism, Mary and Jesus? Okay. All right, but they were referred to as a Set and Haru as pagan and heathen. Well, how can it be so pagan and heathen? This one is first. This is the prototype. Okay. If you're in a classroom, you wrote the paper. Is that correct? But if I come and copy the paper, which one is correct? Yours or mine? But I stand up and try to talk about the paper. I can't get everything right. You see, I got to keep referring back to the original paper.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question before I bring in Empress on the road. Alright, I followed your trail throughout the years, seeing the work of you and your wife and everybody's put in. What is it now what would you like to see before you transcend that? Of all this, what you're doing, what is it that you'd like to see for our people? What is that will fulfill you?
Well, I would like to go back to the ancient language of our ancestors, long before Arabic, long before Aramaic, long before Hebrew. And I would like to say the Kemetic term as Teta, Kemet, Neta, Ankhs, and Nejet. Now, what did I just say? What would I like to see? Is Teta, Kemet, Neta, Ankhs, and Nejet. That means what? Everlasting, black, divine life health and stability for us as an African people.
That's it. Now I got the end of the story.
You can't get better than that.
Nah, when you go to the videos and everything, you need to know where is it leading to.
Right.
And now,
It's our black divinity.
yeah.
All right. As I said, I think I was on the radio show before I got here, and I used the story of my mother, peace be upon her.
Yeah.
I grew up in a house with a white Jesus on the wall,
Yeah.
white figurines, white angels. My mother, when I started lecturing, came back to Pittsburgh, she came to my lectures.
Who is your mother, yeah?
She came to the lectures. Keep in mind, my grandfather's a Baptist Christian, right? So this is her father. She grew up a Christian, powerful. But after the lecture, she didn't say nothing. I didn't badger her. I didn't ask any questions. So I know because there were some things going on in her. She was processing these things, but she always came to the lecture. One day I returned home. I was shocked. I broke down and cried. Because she took the white Jesus down and put a black Jesus up. She got rid of all the white figurines that I had to grow up with. And got black angels. She literally turned her house into a museum. Every time she saw something black, she was trying to make up for it. So what is she intact with? She's intact with her black divinity. Our black divinity is our black spirituality. It's our African spirituality. But we've been taught to demonize it and vilify it. If I use a common thing that we were brought up with, angel's food cake versus a devil's food cake. So we were taught to hate.
That's right.
Blackness.
Yeah.
So she was intact with her spirituality and her black divinity. So I'm happy with that. Okay. I'm not going to try to talk to her about a SAR set in her room. But the young people, whose brain is like a sponge, all right, is young, we have to deal with it on that level, all right? But again, when we deal with Christianity, its foundation is coming up out of that, all right? And if we're dealing with the Christ, we got to deal with a Gnostic Christ, okay? And that means the Yeshua, the spiritual idea of this that was taught, that the Romans feared, because they understood, the Gnostics taught that we all are the Christ. Yet Christ had nothing to do with a man. It's a spirituality. You must rise up. In ancient Kemet, it was called the Ka. Generally, the symbol is 2 arms up. It's a Ka. The Gnostics called it the Charis. The Romans called it Christ. They said, oh, people need a Christ. They just slapped the European Jesus in front of us. This is what you worship. This picture right here. So the people denied their whole spirituality in their whole Charis spirit within themselves, their own Christ.
Oh, Christ with the spirit within yourself?
Within yourself. Because they feared you rise up and fight against tyranny and oppression. Because that's what the Gnostics did. They fought against tyranny, and the Romans feared that. They said, we'll just place this image up in front of them. They don't have to go within themselves to rise up their ka, to rise up their spirit. This is what it was all about. That's one of the reliefs that I show when I'm in Kemet with our groups. How many of you are familiar with the dancing ka, the dancing Jesus, called the dancing Christ? The Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael made a picture. He's got one arm down, with 2 arms up, and one leg up, one leg down. Okay.
So that's that kind.
Yeah, it's called the dancing Christ. I show right on the relief in Kemet. Here's the dancing Haru, carved on the temples. He's free because he's not in the bandages. The mummification of the body. Why is the European image of the Jesus wrapped up in a mummy? He's going to go up to heaven. Just go ahead and go. Why you got to wrap him up? Because they were copying that idea of the mummification process of Kemet for the metamorphosis, for the spirit to go up. So the physical body is the dancing ka. He's in the spiritual realm, but the Romans didn't understand it. They took it literally, that the physical body would rise up. It's the spiritual body that rose up, but the ka, or the physical body, stayed on earth, but the spiritual body rose. So that's what they meant by the dancing ka. And later the Gnostics called it dancing Charis. The Romans took it and called it dancing Christ and put an image in front of us and said, this is it.
But now we know the truth.
Right.
So,
Does a sister want to come in?
All right, you got to balance it out with what the sister said.
Yeah, man. I was going to get up. He said, I'll get up. So I said,
they're talking about the God and the goddess, and they left the sisters out.
Blessed love to you.
Yes, my sister, how are you?
Blessed love to you. Baba, my name is Flower.
Beautiful
And
name.
part of me wanted to just sit here in silence and just listen because I'm just so appreciative of everything you're saying. But this is I'm the only female right now in this room. On behalf of our sisters,
We've got a lot of power right now, sister.
on behalf of our sisters, on behalf of our ancestors and our women line, I know that personally I couldn't sit here and not say anything and just listen. Because in our homes, the ones who's in our homes, who's leading and taking care of our boy child, are our women. I'm glad what you said about mummy, and knowing you said that you could see that when you went back to the house that mum had changed and so forth. How can we need now to simplify all that has been said? It's been years that you have been coming here, and our women, we hear this. But because, again, we are accustomed to, when it comes on to spirituality, we have to go through a male figure. So within our homes where there's no men, because society has separated and how we are running how things just become the norm for just one parent and a female in the house, there's no one there to touch on spirituality, because we somehow also feel that we need to have a male figure present. I'd like for you to bear this in mind and to break down how can our sisters who are listening, our queens, our empresses, our princesses who are listening right now, what can we begin to start doing within our home without the male figure? Because this is so important. And we're talking about there's a feminine energy. There's you know, and I know, that there's something that is dynamic which is taking place right now. It is no coincidence that most of our leaders or whatever are women. We have a prime minister exactly. We have our women taking forth there. Even in the UK, we still have a prime minister female. There's a female energy around. Break it down for us, Baba.
Well, yeah, we're talking about, and in fact, let me say I'm lopsided right now too, because I generally, my Nether Hemp, that's the Kemetic word for divine wife, and I Nether Hedge, divine husband. In fact, Mary Rock, she's the one who researched those terms. We generally come here together for those of you with previous lectures, but of course this is our busy time of the year, preparation for the tour to Egypt that we have coming up in July. We have over 200 and some people, so one of us got to be home. We don't want people to panic, but she deals a lot with the African goddesses and the spirituality with that, which is very powerful. But in relationship to your question, keep in mind we have to look at the fact that the foundation of African spirituality is based off of the whole idea of the goddess. This is what we have to say. We suffer, we brothers suffer because we come out of a system that, in essence, demonized the feminine principle in the religious stories of Eve eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that I mentioned earlier, and that's the reason for the world's 10 sins. That comes out of the Greek culture, the Pandora box of the evils of the world. So the Western world hated the feminine principle, the goddess idea. So that's been incorporated into some of our consciousness in terms of relationship to her, instead of seeing that spiritual dialectical laws of opposites. Keep in mind, in ancient Kemet, the whole spiritual balance was of Ma'at. And who is Ma'at? An African goddess. Who's the African goddess? We're talking about a cosmic goddess of morality, truth, justice, and righteousness that we talked about earlier. So now where's this coming from? This is coming up out of the consciousness of ancient African spirituality. They're developing this. So they're seeing it. So what caused them to deal with the goddess on such a level? From their own empirical observation of Matnechet. What is Matnechet? Mother Nature. Mother Nature is everything. It's the feminine principles that we see around us. The birth of nature coming through right now in the spring solstice, that's feminine, it's birth. Everything that we see with birth. We look at even the animal kingdom. And those of you I love looking at the nature pictures. Everything that you see of that female principle is going to protect that baby. I don't care what form of life it is. From the animal life to the insect, like it's going to protect that baby no matter what.
What's that again? The feminine principle.
The feminine principle, right.
In the animal kingdom.
In the animal kingdom is going to protect that baby. So this is what they observed. This is what they have. This was their keen. This was their keen observation. That everything that we see in life, that power is going to make sure that goddess is going to protect that baby. So they developed a spiritual principle of that empirical observation of what they see around us, the natural forces, not dogma, not something that somebody's right. Because see, now keep in mind, why is the Western world, why do they have such a hatred towards her? Because they're coming out of the ice climate. The ice climate versus the sun climate, right? She was a burden in many cases because of the ice age and so forth. All right, so they developed more of a negativity, and I give respect to a European who wrote the book The Iceman Inheritance, Michael Bradley.
So can you just expand on...
It's a white guy that wrote that book there?
White, yeah. Michael Bradley, who wrote, because, now one thing about with Michael Bradley, and I got your question, well, he has an objective view of his own culture that most Europeans don't like to have. They like to have an objective view of everybody else. But they don't, you notice they don't never want to bring it back on how they have developed their level of consciousness in relationship to history or religion or ideas. Michael Bradley did that. They hated him for it. And he said, our culture comes out of an ice culture. And the ice culture did not recognize the feminine principle. They had a hatred towards her.
Right.
And that's what developed that out of that caveman mentality. Whereas in Africa, it was natural. They saw that she was life itself. You see, she was the one that, even to this day, women are ones that are taking care of the home, the food.
I will share this with you. Until I started going to Africa and doing documentaries, and especially visiting the enslavement sections and talking on it, and seeing the fat houses in Nigeria, that's when I became totally emancipated, although I was brought up in a home wherein I knew that I was a princess. I knew that I was a goddess. But still, I needed to go and touch soil and to be a part of it. Our sisters who cannot go there, right? Who are hearing this for the first time, realizing the power and the goddesses and realizing who they are. Because really, we're talking about
sometimes
big
we don't
time
like to even hear the term
sabotage.
goddess because that has even been demonized as something,
Exactly.
negative.
Exactly. How can we break it down in a short time? How can we get our sisters to start empowering themselves so we can then transfer back into our male child, back into our children?
Well, I think the number one symbol that our ancestors brought forth, the most powerful symbol of all the symbols of the Medu and the glyphs that's on those temples, the one that came out of their spiritual consciousness was the Neter, the divine life, the symbol of the Ankh itself, which is the symbol of her womb. You see, there is where the first baptism took place at. They took that from her. The baby's in the womb at the water. She breaks her water. That's where the first baptism took place at. You see? But the preacher says you got to baptize you in the water because you were born in sin. Because of this misogyny that was created, because Adam and Eve had sex, that's the reason for the world's sins. And now she's demonized and vilified because of Eve. And this is the sick mentality. So she relates to, again, that's what the patriarchs wanted to do, relate to the male. You see, and then she belittles her own self because of the evil of the sin. Okay, so she had told that you must baptize that child because she's born in sin. This is some sick misogynistic stuff. See, we have to think about it, not get caught in fear of damnation and purgatory that you're going to burn in hell to even have the thoughts like this. You see, that's how they created fear. Because before they burned you at the stake back during the Inquisition period. Now they do it mentally and psychologically. So it puts a mental block for you to have a high level of spiritual thinking about this, that the fact that your first baptism took place in the amniotic fluid of our mother's womb. And there we see the European patriarch, they took that idea from her. See, because the power, I mean, we have a lot of theories of how we came here. We can go on and on. But one thing, from our own empirical observation, she breaks that water and life is coming from her. And that is, and nobody can take that away. See, that's power. That's power. See, this is what she has to look at. You see, once you start looking at that from that perspective, then we're on our way to a high spiritual consciousness.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back on, you said about how from the Ice Age, why did they put their women in that position?
Back to that.
Michael Bradley.
What made him write the book?
No, you said that the women, how they treat their women.
Right, it was,
what is the psychology behind their treatment of their women?
Right, when he wrote his book, The Prehistoric Sources of Western Man's Racism, Sexism, and Aggression. Now, the Western world, and definitely Donald Trump, epitomizes all of that. I mean, he's literally coming up out of his own genetic memory bank. Everybody's mad at Donald Trump. I mean, he's working off of his own genetic memory bank. That's his own cave consciousness coming up.
Right.
And the cave consciousness in relation to the woman
is because of what happened during in the Ice Age.
I see.
Yeah, what happened in the Ice Age?
Okay, in the Ice Age, okay, she became in some cases a burden.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to expand on.
Right, because here he was the hunter. He went out to hunt, in the cold, in the Ice Age, and trying to get food and so forth, and bringing it back to the cave and so forth. So she's there waiting for the foods. It's not like in Africa in the Sun Belt, where you're growing food and you're not depending on animals. All right, so you become more of an agricultural society. It was an agricultural society in the Ice Age. All right, so they're depending on this. So he saw her as weak. All right, so out of that is develop a consciousness to demean her.
Right.
And bring her down to a lower level, even to the point that it wasn't for him that she wouldn't even be here, because that's where they developed the religion, the story of the rib.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Even though.
So what is the story of the rib now in relation to that?
Well, it's in the scriptures.
Yeah. What's the symbology behind that story of the rib?
The fact that she doesn't even have the power to be here at the same time as the man.
Right.
That he is, because God made him first.
Yeah.
The rib was taken from him. All right. And her, even though they still show the pictures with Adam with a biblical cord. With the navel.
Right.
The only reason why we got the navel, why they keep painting pictures of Adam, all pictures you see of Adam got a navel.
Right.
Now, sisters, why does Adam got a navel? The biblical cord. If anything, you should at least paint a picture of Adam with a scar on his side. When they took the rib. Okay, but there is no scar on the side. There's a navel. But again, this is patriarchal stuff that was developed.
Right.
You see, and this is where I'm saying for us as an African people, we're the oldest people on the planet Earth. Again, so spiritual consciousness is coming up, and the development is out of the sun belt of things all around. Whereas in the Ice Age, it's harsh. Okay, it's cold. They're not only at war with themselves, they're at war with nature itself.
Yes.
So look at our situation today, global warming. Okay, no respect for the elemental forces of the air and the water and all these things. Okay, it's all been about exploitation of all these elemental forces. That's coming out of, again, the fight that they had out of that Ice Age. No respect for it. So again, also it came out of a culture to exploit these things. So a culture of exploiting everything, no matter what it is. Okay.
I wonder if I could just jump in there. Sorry, Jim, just jump in there, because the reason why, if you look at the so-called Eskimos, and they're in a harsh, cold climate, but yet again, they don't go out and murder and kill and whatever. And how would you explain those people there?
Yeah, again, with Eskimos, you keep in mind all these people, no matter who they are, okay, are coming from the earliest Africans who migrated into Europe, who migrated into the Ice Age. We're talking about the Grimaldi's, okay, these early Homo sapiens, all right, who came from the early hominids, all right. So they migrated to these various regions of the world. So again, when you're looking at the caveman, when you're looking at his elemental forces in terms of the Eskimos, you're looking at two totally different people. We're looking at two totally different migrations.
Right.
Okay, who, in terms of the early Eskimos, I think they may have been some of the earliest Africans who migrated into various areas. Okay, keep in mind that they are in the sun belt because they're way in the Arctic where they get sun. Okay, now keep in mind, now look at England. How much sunlight do you get here? I mean, even now, you don't get a lot of sunlight. It's cloud, it's overcast, and so forth. So the Eskimos are getting more melanated, more pineal gland activation. That's one of the things that Michael Bradley mentioned in his book, The Prehistoric Sources of Western Man's Racism and Sexual Aggression, that they lack the development of the pineal gland.
Right.
Okay, from the sunlight.
Right. Now that explains it.
Right.
Could you just go into the pineal gland, what the function is?
The pineal. Now, keep in mind, if you were to take anatomy today, and you wanted to go to be a doctor and so forth, they would tell you the anatomy that the pineal gland has no purpose. What arrogance! As sophisticated as the human body is, but our ancestors in ancient African spirituality and ancient Kemet, they saw the pineal gland as the development of spirit. It was a gland for spiritual consciousness. It was activated by the sun. Right. So on King Tutankhamun, on his gold shrine in the Cairo Museum, he is standing in a 360 degrees perpendicular with the sun Ra activating his pineal gland. That's referred to as the third eye, the spiritual eye. So this is the spiritual consciousness coming from the activation of this gland itself. Now this gland is activated by melanin. All right, melanin is a black substance. All right, that it pulls in the sunlight. And this is what creates a whole spiritual consciousness that how our ancestors saw it. So this is where, if one is living out of the Sun Belt, then of course that's going to be the underdevelopment of that pineal gland.
And what do you mean by spirituality? What is it? What is the?
Well, it's a spiritual consciousness.
What is spirituality?
Okay,
because
spiritual
the
consciousness.
Greeks place it down to just breath.
Okay.
So what would you say spirituality is?
Spiritual consciousness is seeing a spiritual divinity in things around you. Okay, the rising of the sun, the changes of what we see, the spring solstice right now, life coming all around us. This is how spiritual consciousness developed by natural things. All right, not because someone wrote dogma and wrote it down as religious facts.
What's dogma?
Dogma is when someone takes and writes things down in religion and then cause people to say that this is facts, it's belief system. All right, like I talked about earlier, that you were born in sin. That's dogma. All right, this is what I mean by that, and it's written down as though this is the word of God. All right, and then people are taught to believe that. You see, and that's the only thing that we have known. Because we're looking at this man-made dogma instead of the natural forces all around us. As I'll go back to our previous things I was saying, had the European culture looked at the natural phenomena and the spiritual phenomena, we wouldn't have no global warming problem now. We wouldn't have polluted water now. You wouldn't build factories on the banks of river banks that you need water to survive. These things we need to survive by, but you have no respect for it because it's exploiting these things. So there's no spirituality in relationship to these elemental forces.
Right.
Which is part of that whole spiritual consciousness.
Right.
All right? If I cut off your air, how long are you going to live?
Yeah.
If I put my hand over your nose and your mouth, how long are you going to live? Not long. So you better give respect to that.
Yeah.
We call it shoe. Air. Okay.
So I want to just take you back now. You know when you said Dr. Benning, you was a field. You said you went on the field and it opened your consciousness.
The seeing the reality.
Seeing the reality.
The books in stone. They're there.
Yeah, because in relation to like the things that you can remember, how you can put the information together.
Yes, sir.
You know, was that part of that experience that enables you to?
Well, of course, this took time. Okay. This was, keep in mind, I've been a victim of like everybody else. Is the same dog bit you, bit me too. So I'm not looking at myself as anything special. It's just that I started to do the research and to return back to Africa to these monuments and temples. And
roughly how many times have you been?
Well, I can't say how many times. I can tell you how many years.
How many years?
38 years. Sometimes
Wow.
I go multiple times in 1 year. So it's been 38 years nonstop. So that's most of my life that I have done this. But that's the spirit and the fire that evoked in me to start this journey. And then when you start on a journey like this, you get into a time warp. You get into a time where you're not even conscious. You're not even conscious of time anymore. I didn't even know I was turning gray until I looked at a video one day.
I just want to say to anyone who's listening on the radio, he's studying history, but he's looking younger. So I encourage everybody to study history, then you can look like the man himself.
I'm not into dyeing my hair and all that kind of stuff to go down into my brain. So I just left it as it is. So I've been to the mountaintop and I climbed the pyramids every year when I was young. See, so I use that analogy. That's where I got my gray, because I went to the top of the pyramids and climbed them here. Like gray. But again, I had to study these temples, monuments. Or keep in mind that these biblical scholars, all right, who are part of the Biblical Archaeology Society and so forth, they are still over there plundering temples and tombs and incorporating these things into their religions today. These things are still going on. And that's why the consciousness of our people and the denial of our African selves, you can say you're going anywhere. You can tell, black folks can tell you they're going anywhere on the planet Earth. But as soon as you bring up Africa, why are you going to Africa? Nobody else says that, but us. You see, because of what they put down into our consciousness. This is the original Taneta land. What am I saying, the Taneta land? This is the original Holy Land. Even if we look at the biblical accounts of these things,
is land.
Right. This is the original Holy Land. So, even if we look at the biblical account of all these things, okay, from that point of view, the story opens up with Abraham coming into Africa, coming into Egypt. That's Northeast Africa. All right. Then we see Joseph. Everybody's coming into Africa. He comes into Africa. We get a story of Moses. He grows up in Africa. We get a story of Greek philosophers like Thales, Pythagoras, Socrates. They're coming into Africa. All right. So everybody's coming there. So this is where we have to question, what are they getting there? This is where these ideas come out of. Greek philosophers came there, got their philosophy. I call it philosophy because they never really understood it. All right, the spiritual system of it. And we see the Western religions that developed from the early, whether we're looking at the Old Testament or the New Testament, okay, with the Greeks and coming down, and before them the Hebrews coming in. Everybody is coming in to get these ideas. So that's why the temples are so important, because they were there when these stories and these others were coming in. So that's where my journey started.
Right.
My studying, and it didn't come overnight. All right, it's been a journey like anything else, and studying the reliefs. See, when I first went to Kemet, the temples will blow your mind. Anybody that will go there to see the pyramids, to see the greatest temple on the planet Earth, Ibn Sut, the world's first universities, is now called Karnak today. Mind blowing to walk down between those 134 columns, lotus columns. It'll just blow your mind. To see you can get captivated by that architectural structure at first. But what blew me away when I started looking at those reliefs?
When you start looking at
The reliefs, that's the writing.
How do you say it?
Reliefs, right.
Reliefs.
Yeah, right. Yeah, reliefs. That's the Medunetia.
Okay.
Okay, well, the Greeks call it hieroglyphics.
Right, but it's reliefs.
Right. So looking at these, the Medunetia, okay, and then starting to study Western culture deeply, studying the Bible, the stories of the Bible, and going back and doing a comparative analysis. That these stories were already on the temple. For instance, all of us know about Moses and the bulrushes, is that right? We know about Moses found the bulrush.
Yeah.
I take our group to an area called the Mimizi House at the Temple of Aset. It's the most southern part of Kemet in Ta-Nehisi, called Nubia today. There we go up into the Mimizi House, and what do we see? Aset hiding in the papyrus swamps. Why is she hiding in the papyrus swamps? Because there's an evil brother. Long before the Cain and Abel story, there's an evil brother, okay, of Asar named Set, who killed Asar. So here we have an evil brother killing the good brother. There was no Cain and Abel story yet. Aset, who the Greeks call Isis, had to hide in the papyrus swamps because she feared that Set would kill her child born of holy birth, the Immaculate Conception. So she's hiding in the papyrus swamps. So what I do is take the groups in the Mimizi House. I got the pictorial pictures of the Bible. I put it right up to the relief, and everybody just gasps because it's the same exact one. The only difference is this one is carved in stone of Asar in a set in the bulrushes. I mean in the papyrus swamps. But here you see the pictorial picture of Moses in the bulrushes. You see? Now, there's a line going through across the temple. Okay? Why is that line there? Because these temples were under the sand. They only dug them out in the turn of the century to make tourist dollars, not to tell the truth. How many groups go up in here and reveal this? I've never seen any, because most of the time the people want to come here to see the glory of Egypt and so, but they don't want them to come here to think and see where these stories came from. You see. Now, who created these stories? Kemetic Africans in the Nile Valley thousands of years ago. And this is how the religions developed.
So I just want to ask a question. We had this debate before you came. If the original text comes from Kemet and the Bible then is copied that, does that mean that the Bible Moses is false? They didn't exist as real people. It was just a copy of a story.
I would say they didn't exist as real people.
So the Moses never existed. Abraham never existed.
Okay, so let's deal with the story of Moses. And we're going to deal with even from Europeans' perspective. Okay.
Right.
Now we're going to deal with real personality. I'm going to speak of a real personality here.
And sorry, after this question, I'm going to bring in the next one.
We're going to deal with a real personality. We're not going to. Okay. Now, what real personality am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about Neb-Peti-Ra Atmos the First.
Can you say that again, please?
Neb-Peti-Ra Atmos the First. He opened up the 18th dynasty. He's a real person. He's, at this time, his father, Second and Retau of the 17th dynasty, were fighting a people called the Hyksos. They were invaders. They came in and enslaved the Kemetic Africans for 200 years. They occupied the Delta region of Egypt until Neb-Peti-Ra Atmos came in and expelled all of the Hyksos out of Egypt. Okay, this is the 18th dynasty. Josephus, a European Jewish historian who lived around 37 to 100 AD. They said they took from Atmos a real story of an expulsion of a large people out of Egypt and made a Moses. See, now, at most, we know we can
At
find him. We
most,
can see him at most. He's a real person. You can find him in any history book in the world. It's dealing with ancient Egypt. This is the only story that we got of a large group of people being expelled out of Egypt. It was at most. We open up the 18th dynasty. So this is where we see they took from Kemetic stories into making up of the religions when they came in and occupied it. Now we know that the Hebrews who are coming from, we're talking about Sumer, okay? We're talking about the southern part. Now that southern part is black. Well, these are black Hebrews, okay, coming from the southern part of the Tigris Euphrates. But who are invading from the north, from a place called Mitanni, that is present-day Iraq. So you have these two groups of people coming in. These Hebrews are coming up from the south, and by the way, they're not Hebrews at this time. They don't become Hebrews, so they come in.
What were they before they became Hebrews? What were they called?
They're living down into coming from the Elamites. They're coming from the Natufians, who are all noted for being black because of the ancient Cushites. This ancient Cush ruled over all this area. That's why the Bible opens up with Cush, the ancient Cush. Okay, it ruled over, it came up, it's the birth of even Egypt is from Cush. Okay.
Well, I'm just going to stop there because I'm going to have to go and get some smelling salts now because he's just overloading my brain here. And he's warming up for tomorrow. Well, I'm just letting the Facebook people know.
Now, some things I'm drawing from the lecture that I'm going to talk. Some of the things I'm drawing from the lecture that I'm going to talk about on Monday.
What are you going to be talking about roughly, so people
tomorrow?
Listening?
Tomorrow I'm dealing with African divinity and spirituality, the origin of Christianity.
Right.
So that's coming from the whole Christian perspective.
And then and the following lectures are going to be about.
In Birmingham on Monday, I'm going to deal with the African origin of the Bible and the Quran.
Right. Okay.
Even though on Sunday I will be dealing with the lecture that I did here today.
Right.
So originally I was supposed to come in April. I think we got some schedules. Right. We will come around Easter and Passover. Yeah, that was really that's how it ended up with the titles. With the Bible and Christianity because of those two holidays, Passover and the resurrection. Okay. Passover was actually the passing of the sun over the equator. Right. Okay. That's why the ram was used because of the ram, the sun in the constellation of Aries. That's a whole other story.
Okay, well, I'm going to let the other question. I could talk to you for days on this.
No, I'm just going to. It's cool. You can get it.
But see, the debates come up. See, when we don't have the whole story, we can debate things and go on and on and on. And sometimes it can get very irrational. Right? Because we don't have chronology. We don't have the sources. Okay, the only sources we're drawing from are Western sources. As I said, our consciousness has been circumscribed to think within their diameter. Okay, so if you make a circle, our thoughts and everything is coming from inside the circle. But here, the real knowledge is outside the circle. All right. So this is what I mean by he who circumscribes the circumference determines the diameter of your opinion. So again, the objective I come with these lectures is not for people to believe in what I'm saying, but to think about what I'm saying. We have a cerebral organ called the brain. This organ is for to think out problems. That's what it's there for. Okay.
So there's one more thing. The brother wants to comment. Is how do we extract the practical spirituality, which I know you're touching on, from even like the hieroglyphs? How, even though you can know the sounds and how to read the symbols, how do you extract that knowledge into practical?
Okay, well I'll take one of the Medu Nature glyphs. I'll just use one of them. Sarah.
Which is Sarah is in Saraseti. Yeah.
No, Sarah. Son of God.
Okay.
Can we tell our babies, the son that's born from our mother's womb, that is a son of God? Can we tell her that the daughter is born as a Sitra, a daughter of God?
What's the daughter's
Sitra.
Sitra.
Or I get caught into a situation that I got caught into in Dallas. During Dallas, there's a lot of space and people got yards and everything. So every year around December, you got all these plastic white babies all over the place in the yards. Around December, people pull out these plastic white babies out their closets, and a plastic white man and a plastic white female, and they call it the Holy Family. And I asked one brother I saw him putting the white plastic baby in his yard. I said, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm teaching my son. He has a son in his arm. He said, I'm teaching my son that this is the Son of God. I said, no, brother, this is a plastic thing that you got out the closet. I said, your son is the Son of God. He said, my son is not the Son of God. This is the Son. I said, no, brother, please understand me. This is a plastic thing that have it in the closet every year, and you put this down, and you've been brainwashed that this is the Son of God, when in fact your son is the Son of God. And that idea came from Sarah. It's still on your ancient African temples. Oh, that's heresy. Get out my yard. See, he can't understand that. He can't understand that his own son is the Son of God. So this is the practical spirituality. Because once we start to see that divinity, that's why I said in the Kemetic language, and you asked me earlier, and I said what? Tera, Kemet, Neta, Senejet. Everlasting, black, divine life. That's what we got to get to. Because we've been taught even to see ourselves. Look at how we're literally exterminating ourselves in America as black folks.
Over here as well.
Right. Yeah, this community's been totally wiped out. Because that brainwashing has been so deep of the hatred of our own black divinity. Okay, that's what we see here. I see your physical body, but in there is a black divinity, a black spirituality. That's what's making you.
So, as a son or a sister of God, then, what kind of mentality or behavior do you encapsulate or take on?
Power, spiritual power. I mean, look at the power of this little plastic thing or animation thing or picture. Look at the power people do with that, because they've been brainwashed into that. So imagine if you take that power that they've been putting into these little objects, and take that same power and power that into that baby, and let that baby grow up. You're the Son of God. You see, so it'd be impossible for us to destroy each other, understanding that each one of us is a son of God, or a Sitra, a daughter of God.
What is the correct terminology? Because I don't really like the word God. So what is the correct?
Well, our ancestors use many terms of God, depending on where we are at different times, even in ancient Kemet. At one time, Kemet is so old. Like for instance, at one time we had Ptah, and then in the middle kingdom of Kemet you had Amen. But keep in mind, let me also mention, because we spoke of the goddess, they all had a goddess, because Ptah had Sekhmet. It was a holy family. The son was Khonsu. In the middle kingdom of Kemet, it was Amen. And the mother was Mut. This is where we get the term mother from, by the way, Mut. Okay? And then we see Khonsu was a spiritual child. So all of them had that spiritual trinity and black divinity in that spiritual family. So Amen, that we still say at the end of our prayers. Amen. The Greeks took Amen out of Africa. This is where Amen comes from.
What does Amen mean?
Amen is the spiritual God, the spiritual divinity.
So
Amen,
spiritual.
now keep in mind, Amen is in an anthropomorphic form or human form. When you see him, he's jet black. Jet black. Blacker than your shirt. Okay. And he's in a human form. Now, was Amen in this human form, in a human form like us? No. But what they did for us to understand it, they anthropomorphized it. Okay. Now,
anthropomorphize me
in a human form. Okay. Now, what is scientists bringing to us today? Dark matter. Dark matter is everywhere. It's right in this room right now. We can't see it. It's in us. So Amen represented the invisible spirit.
Right.
It's in us. It's everywhere. Permeates throughout the whole universe. What they did was anthropomorphized it in a human form. For us to understand it. They took air, called Shu, and put it in a human form for us to understand it. This is what they did. But now, was it in human form? No, it's a spiritual force that's all around us. But for our human consciousness to understand it, only understanding it from how we look. So we are the first ones who anthropomorphized God in the human image, long before the European religions were even on the scene. You know, these images, they have God in the picture, looking out the heavens and all this kind of stuff. Ancient Africa had that spiritual story. So back to your question, the name of God in the early period, Ptah, Middle Kingdom, Amen. We also say Akhenaten had Aten. All right. Now Europeans would come and say, "Oh, that's polytheism. That's many gods." No, it's different names at different periods of time. Just like in the Bible, at one point God is called Elah, another point God is called Elohim, another point God is called Yahweh, another point God is called Jehovah. Is that polytheism? No, this is different names at different periods of time. Okay, now we can go and see El Demare. We can go to West Africa and see the Yorubas. Okay, because the Orishas and the Netarus are the same. So we also had the name for the spiritual divinity. All right, so we also had among the Dogon, they also had very similar to ancient Kemet, Amma. All right, for the spiritual name. So depending on where we are on the continent, it's the same spiritual consciousness of this divinity or deity or God coming up out of African people's consciousness. Our ancestors created it. But yet we are looking at it coming from a European world.
That's right.
When they weren't even on the scene yet.
I'm gonna pass the baton over now.
Yeah, I just got one question. Dougie can sit down still. Yeah, greetings. Yeah, I've got one. Just one question ish. Yeah. I've been to the British Museum and I've seen lots of things on the tombs about pharaohs. Yeah. Some of these pharaohs have locks. Explain to me how come they have locks and the concept of how come it's gone back that far. The locks. Explain to her why they had locks.
Well, one of the ones who wore locks very prominently is Nima Adra Amenemhet III of the Middle Kingdom. And notice I said Amenemhet. What did you hear?
Head.
Amenemhet. Amen.
Amen.
See, that's how you knew who the God was worshipped. You see, because like Khafra, you see, when you hear Khafra, Khafra built the Great Pyramid. What name were you hearing?
Ra.
You're hearing Ra. So we see the power of Ra, his power during that time. Okay. So again, that was the hair. This is with the Amenemhet, and I'd take brothers who got locks on the trip and put them right next to Amenemhet, just like the brother. So this is the hair that they had. Now, when they were a youth, they had what is called a haru lock. The haru lock hang off the side. It hang off the side right here. But as they became older, then they wore the locks. Now the locks we see more prominent in the Middle Kingdom. All right, that's the blackest part of Egypt. I mean, that during the time of the Middle Kingdom too, by the way. So you see the locks are very prominent during that particular period. So again, they had the locks because that was their hair that they wore. And so it showed the power, that they had in the hair. Now keep in mind, hair, we can get into a whole nother consciousness even about hair, because it's
I know, because your wife talks a lot about the hair, so
right.
That's why I'm asking you about that.
Right. So we can look at it as a receptive antennas, and that's a whole nother energy. Now keep in mind that keratin is hair, this like our hair, it's protein. The reason why our hair is the way it looks is because of protein. Straight hair actually doesn't have any protein. So when people say bad hair and good hair, but the bad hair is actually the straight hair. I'm not making a joke out of it. This is the real reality. It doesn't have a lot of keratin. Right.
Our hair's got protein
because of what? The sun.
The
sun belly again. It's back to the sun. Okay. Whereas and when you lack of sun, you start to lack that protein. So the hair becomes straight. So in the British Museum you have a lot, and considering that you spoke at the British Museum, I think one of the most powerful. Even though you have a lot of the Nesus, Pharaoh, by the way, is only means great house. Okay, it has nothing to do with the name of the king. The Hebrews took the name and said Pharaoh. It means literally great house. The names that they use is Nesu. Nesu would be translated today as king. And even though you have a lot of Nesus in the British Museum that they stole, just like we were stolen from Africa, and they put in these museums. Melzoni was one of those plunderers, and you see Ursama Adra, Septepen Rama Mesumari Amun, Min Keparatu Imaze, and all these great Nesus are in the British Museum. And even though you see them, but one of the most powerful stones that's in the British Museum, and I always make sure I stop by and see that stone, that's called the Memphite Theology Stone. And what's powerful about this Memphite Theology Stone is that this is the earliest creation story. This is where the idea of Genesis, by the way, it's not a Hebrew word, it's a Greek word. Genesis means the beginning. This is coming from that Memphite Theology Stone. Here we see Ptah, that I said earlier. It says, let there be light. Now, where have you heard that before? Genesis. That's in Genesis. Here we see the creation in this Memphite Theology Stone is telling about the creation of a Sar and a Set, the first man and woman. Created simultaneously, too, by the way. There was no real. I'll go back to that story again. That's what makes this stone so powerful, where Ptah is creating the heavens and the earth. Now, when we look at James Usher is a European in around the 1600s who said the world was created on October 9th, at 9 a.m., all right, 4004 BCE, or before the Christian era. Well, that should be a big holiday. The creation of the world, October 9th, it was October 22nd, one of them in October. The creation of the world. The question is, where is James Usher getting this from? James Usher is getting this from the Memphite Theology Stone. It goes back to over 4,000 BCE. This is where he's drawing that from. So he's incorporating it into, like the Europeans are saying this, or creating this, and it becomes part of the religious dogma, because the creation of the world is 6,000 years ago. That's the creation of Adam and Eve. That was taken from the Memphite theology stone. So now that stone is called the Shabaka stone. This is a Cushite African from ancient Kush who found it and that Memphite theology story, all right? And he's the one that recreated it. And that's why it's called the Shabaka stone. And I think that's one of the most powerful pieces in the British Museum.
Is that big black?
It's a big stone with like a sulfur and a hole in the middle. Right. That's called the Memphite theology stone. That Memphite theology stone, now it's called the Memphite theology stone because of ancient Menefer. And there we see Ptah. That was the ancient city of Ptah, of ancient Menefer, which is right outside of Giza in Egypt today. So this is what makes the Kushite Kemetic culture so powerful, because we have the evidence. There's the evidence there. We're not talking about something outside of ourselves here. We're talking about that which has been stolen, okay, and corrupted, and rewritten for Europeans, for the European world, and their religions. And sometimes that's hard for us to grasp.
Yeah, I just want to say it's an absolute pleasure. I've been following your work bit by bit in whatever material that I can pick up. I have to say it's an absolute treat to be here. I'm ecstatic. I've got two questions. You touched, well, first question, you touched a little bit on dark matter. And I wanted to know what your connection would be, or if there's any knowledge that you know about with that and the atom. Because our scientists today, they talk about the atom being almost, 90% empty space. So is there a connection between...
Okay, from the Western world, their first idea of the atom comes through the Greeks, the Greek philosophers, okay? Is it Democritus? And Dr. George M. James, in his book, Dr. George M. James' Stolen Legacy. In fact, he talks about the fire atoms that the Greeks stole up out of the ancient chemists, Memphite, in fact, going back to the Memphite theology story. And it talks about the whole creation of these fire atoms. Now, keep in mind that our ancestors understood the atom. Now, it's like everything else. Where's your consciousness at when you start to go at something? If your consciousness is evil, then of course you're going to unlock, using their term, the Pandora box. That evil will be opened up. Okay. But if your consciousness is a consciousness of spiritual harmony with Mother Nature itself, then there's wonderful things that can open up. Now use that analogy in relationship to the atom, and where our ancestors talked about the Memphite theology story, and they talked about the wonderful things as the Kari Hebs, or priests of ancient Kemet, studied this for thousands of years. It's from that understanding of that atom is how they built the pyramids. Inside of the atom, there are triangular objects that looks just like the pyramid. Okay, so that's coming out of their consciousness that made ancient Kemet. Now, if evil is coming out, if you're looking at and want to do evil things, how did the Europeans look at the atom? The same way they did us, divide and conquer. They split the atom. In the splitting of the atom, then what have you created? Atomic bombs. Okay. Destruction. And now you got these colliders. They got one in Texas, I think.
The hydrogen collider.
Yeah, and what do these hydrogen colliders do?
Yeah, they smash chemical particles.
Okay, right, and that's like okay. Let's say you come here from somewhere else, and you don't know what a car is. You just see these objects running around. You don't know what it is. All right, but you want to find out what a car really is. So you're going to take two cars and you're going to smash them together. Now that's a car. Okay, because is that understand, because you got an atom smasher, that now you have tried to understand these powerful forces of Mother Nature, that you have now collided something, and now you think that you know what it is, because you're trying to see something deep in a spiritual realm that cannot be seen with the naked eye in this physical form. See, this is where you come when one is operating out of evil. So what they do, they created the most destructive forces on the planet Earth that they don't want anybody to have, because this money that we got, whether it's the American dollars or the British pound, is backed by weapons of mass destruction.
Well, it's true to say that they have a physical connection to the universe as opposed to we have a spiritual connection. So they will have to, do tests and all this kind of stuff, because that's the only way that they can actually figure out what's what.
Exactly.
They have to go around the park instead of cutting through the middle type of thing.
Yes, sir. It's the foundation of what we started with. When I talked about the Ka, it's going right back to what we talked about, because the Romans didn't understand spiritual things. They took when they saw the mummy, and they saw the ideas of ancient Kemet, and how the Ka was going up, the spiritual body, they took it literally, that the physical body would get up out the grave and go to heaven. And that's the foundation of the Western version of Christianity to this very day, that you will be a physical resurrection, when it was a spiritual resurrection. Now, why did Kemet? Why did they use a mummy? Let's look at that. How did they come up with that idea of the mummy? Mention it again. Let's look at a caterpillar. It's crawling on the ground. Now, this is an insect that crawls on the ground. Now, let's think about it for a minute. Now, here's something that goes through a cocoon. Okay? And in that process, it's going through a metamorphosis. And in that metamorphosis, and this is going to be this is interesting here. In that process, what is it called? Now, what's that process of that metamorphosis
change.
called? No. It's called a chrysalis. Chrysalis. The chrysalis is going through the metamorphosis. Where they get the idea of Christ wrapping up in a mummy? Okay. Once that metamorphosis takes place, what happens to this? Once it was a caterpillar, what are you looking at now? A beautiful butterfly that flies. We went through a whole transformation from this thing that crawled on the ground, it goes into a cocoon, goes through a metamorphosis called a chrysalis, because it's inside the shell. It's the chrysalis process. And then it opens up in a butterfly. So our ancestors mummified the body, the physical body, to go through this, the Ka, they called it the Ka, the Gnostics, who was a conduit, so to say, who drew from ancient African spirituality. At that time, the Romans were on the scene now. The Romans feared them because the Gnostics understood this whole process. So they called it the caress. Okay? But in ancient Kemet, they wrapped the body up for a metamorphosis to take place. But the Kat, we call mummy today, it stayed in the earth. But it was the metamorphosis, the spiritual body rose up. The Romans couldn't see that. They didn't understand it. Because why? It's spiritual. It's spiritual. Spirituality. Still what they can't see today. And that's why you got the European images in the pictorial art, in the Western art of Jesus. I call it Serapis Jesus. Every time you see a European Jesus, you got to be specific. That's Serapis. He was created at the Conference of Nicene in 325 AD. These ecumenical conferences, these religious European gangsters got together in the formulation of the religious world order at that time. Okay? And that's why they shut down Kemet. Because Kemet had the evidence through the temples that I've been talking about. And then they were able to prove these ideas, but they corrupted them. So as I said, in the copying of somebody's paper, they didn't get the whole story right because they took it literally. The physical body will rise up out the grave one day, you see. Because they didn't understand the spiritual body called the Sahu, because this is the Sahu Ka. It's called the Ka Sahu, the spiritual body, you see. So when the Byzantine Romans came on the scene, they didn't understand it, that translation. They took it literally. So you have 300 years of the Ptolemies. Okay, after Alexander's death, they took over, usurped the throne. The Romans come in and usurped it from the Ptolemies. That's 400 years. Then you got the Byzantine Romans and the formulation of Western version of Christianity. Okay, which is another almost 400 years. You got 1,000 years of Europeans' occupation of ancient Kemetic knowledge, who controlled this at this time. 1,000 years of copying and plagiarizing and building that Alexandria library and copying from these papyruses and the formulation and the making of these various Bibles. An intelligent question to ask. Where's the first one? Going back to our original conversation. in Egypt. This is what developed the Koine version of the Bible, around 52 AD. All right? So Egypt plays the major part in all of this, coming down to also Hieronymus Eusebius. That becomes the Rome Latin Vulgate version of the Bible. That means at this time, Roman Catholicism is ruling the world through the Latin Vulgate version of the Bible. Here, even in England, that was the Bible too that they used, until King James rebelled against the Pope of Rome. Now the question is, why did King James rebel against the Pope of Rome? And it was Tyndale, here in England, who was starting to break away from the Latin Vulgate version of the Bible. All right? But what brought James in on it was the fact that when the Catholic Church had Portugal and Spain kidnapping our African ancestors from the continent, Portugal and Spain was making a lot of money off of the resources of kidnapping of our ancestors from the continent. The other European powers like England, the Dutch, the French, they were observing this and seeing this power that the Portugal and Spain was developing. So King James said that they wanted in on the slave trade. And the Pope did not want the other Europeans in on the slave trade. Why? It would reduce the money coming to the church. All right, so they wanted to keep them out of it. So James said later for Rome, in fact, we're going to formulate our own Bible. In fact, we're going to call it the King James Version. That's why it's called Version. And those Bibles that you find in the hotel, the Bible's always in the drawer in the hotel. And the first page you open up, King James Version, diligently compared and revised. Now, an intelligent person would ask, what does it mean by diligently compared and revised? That means you're copying from other sources, okay, in the making of this thing. So he got Francis Bacon, Henry Saville, and others to sit down, and Shakespeare to sit down and write the King James Version of the Bible. And that is because of us. Because the Pope did not want them in on the slave trade.
Right.
And that's how they broke away from the Latin Vulgate version of the Bible. So all these Bibles down to the millennials. In fact, even America and England almost went to war in 1901 because America is the power of the day. We're the power of this day. We want our Bible. Everybody else got a Bible. Why can't we have a Bible? So England wanted their Bible to be the last Bible. Okay, since it's the power of the day, they're ruling the world and everything. And so America wrote the New American Bible, a New Bible Express. I use Express from Heaven. No, it ain't Express from Heaven. but so in 1901, they almost went to war.
Okay, we perhaps just wind down a little bit now. I'm going to ask Jeff give the mic to Jeff, please, just to let people about the information what's taking place over this weekend. I know Jeff, don't look at Jeff's eyes. Sorry. Burn out much.
Before we even say that, and if one wants to look at one of the most powerful pamphlets that Dr. Ben put together, even though he wrote a lot of books, I think one of his most powerful is one of his smallest, thin little pamphlet called The Chronology of the Bible. It's a very, gives you all these various Bibles, and keep in mind, and I didn't mention it, and got to mention it, we got to mention, the Per Emma coming forth by day and by night. This is the earliest holy text, called the Per Emma, that even when Wallace Budge, when he was robbing the papyruses in Egypt, that's how you see the Per Emma. Now he cut it up, and now it's all stretched across the walls in the British Museum. That's what that is, the Per Emma, coming forth by day and by night. These are the earliest spiritual texts before the Western Bibles or even their existence. And I'll be dealing with that on Monday, on the origin of the Bible and the Quran, when you make an announcement.
Yeah, so people would like to hear more, which I'm sure they will, from what the discussion is. The place to be is the Art Center on Friday. So it's this Friday, doors open at 6 o'clock. The program starts at 7 o'clock. But also there's a whole weekend, because on Sunday and Monday he will also be in Birmingham. And as you can see, there'll be a host of speakers, because this is African Liberation Day. And just for those of you who don't know what African Liberation Day is, So quick synopsis, African Liberation Day was actually started in 1963, and it came out of Africa Freedom Day, something that Kwame Nkrumah set in motion. So the Organization of African Unity in 63 put together a day when African people would come together and commemorate a lot of the things that has happened to us, commemorate the Ma'afa, which we suffered as a people. So that falls on the 25th of May each year. So since 1975, the Pan-African Congress movement has been commemorating this day. So I think this made the 44 years the Pan-African Congress movement has been doing this. So I mean, everybody is welcome to come to Birmingham to help to commemorate with us. Apart from Baba Ashra Kwesi, we were also having Brother Vasco Stevenson, and he'll be looking at the role that Common West Indian played in the building of the Panama Canal. And it's a fascinating insight because it will blow your mind some of the things that actually happened. And I'm knowing especially a lot of people from the Caribbean, such as Jamaica, Barbados and so forth, would know somebody back in their family who would have had some connection with the building of the canal. We were also having Patricia Daly. Professor Daly is an Oxford-based professor, and she'll be looking at basically the recolonizing of Africa, because, as she says, there's a whole scramble for Africa all over again. And we just have to look at what's going on. We just have to look at the role that the Chinese are playing in Africa right now, and the role of other European powers, especially powers like France, for instance, who never really left, because France had imposed in Africa the colonial tax, which even after the supposed independence, those African states under Francophone rule is paying France 500 billion per year. 500 billion per year as France's payment for the independence, payment for the deficit France put in. And also the currency is given to them by France, is controlled by France, the CFA. And recently there's a brother, I think he's from Benin, that's been protesting against that. And for his protest, I know he was locked up in Senegal, he's recently deported from Cote d'Ivoire because they do not want to know. And French, as the Italian fascists said recently, without that income coming in from Africa, France would not be in the top 10 world economies. So that's something we've got to bear in mind. And then we'll also be having Dr. Erica McInnes. She's a clinical psychologist. And what we'll be doing at LD this year, we'll be giving over most of the first day as for youth conference. So we're gathering some youth organizations up and down the country, bringing them together to look at what's really happening with the youths, why this internalizing violence against each other. And going from London, we'll be having the Manhood Academy, we'll be represented, we'll be also having the Black People's Giving, BPG, and also AWF, African World Federation. So they'll be coming up from London. We're also having groups from Birmingham, and groups will be coming down from Manchester. So that will be led by Erica McGuinness, that whole conference. We'll be also having Kimani Nahusi, and some of you may be familiar with him. He was based for many years in this country. I think now he's based at Temple University, and he'll be looking at Africa, Pan-Africanism, and what it means, and how we can actually start putting Pan-Africanism into practice. And by that I mean having an Afrocentric view of the world and shaking off the Eurocentric view. Similar to what Baba Kwesi was saying about Christianity, because that's part of the whole package that has been given to us. So he'll be looking at that. Apart from that, We have solidarity messages from organisations, both national and international, each year. And we'll be also having a African market area with up to 50 to 60 stalls of, entrepreneurs, African people getting together, trading, going to Africa, bringing back goods, because as we can see, when the 60s rolled out, after the 1945 Pan-African Congress, which by the way was held here in Manchester, when African countries started, African leaders, African personalities started to get up and say, look, it's about time we get independence for Africa. It's about time now we have put in another effort. Europe started to step out. And when that was being rolled out, that we can see that they were given a flag to fly, maybe a national anthem to sing, but who still held the economy of those countries? When Nkrumah said from colonialism to neo-colonialism, which we're still in a state of neo-colonialism. So that's what we got.